To welcome you all to Southern Cross University. I'm Erica Wilson, for those that don't know me, chair of CAUTHE, and I'm also based at this university, though, at the Lismore campus. So we've got a perfect day outside, and a bit later on, hopefully you can go out on the patio and have a coffee or tea in the sun there. So just a couple of, I do want to acknowledge country just briefly here. We are on the lands of the Yugambeh people, which runs up and down the coast here and inland a bit. And this campus, obviously the airport, everything is built on their lands, which haven't been ceded. So I just want to acknowledge that and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. A couple of housekeeping things. So the fire exits, I'm told, I'm not based at this campus, but just at the stairwell right out the back there. And I think there's a door behind here, oh good, that says exit. The toilets are just out the door on the left at the back. What else do I need to say? There's Wi-Fi, there's a little sign as you walk in on the tea table. If you want to sign up, just look for SCU and there's a password there, or you might have Ed Jerome. I think we've got morning tea 11 to 11:30 after the panel session, the mid-year meeting, then lunch at 1 p.m. And we have a birthday cake, which is fantastic. So for those of you on Zoom, it's the same Zoom link for the whole session, for this and the next one, and for the day. So yeah, and thanks to our amazing team here at SCU Events. And I'll hand over to you, Betty. All right, thanks.
It's taller than me, by a bit. Good morning, everyone. My name's Betty Weiler. I'm along with Bob McKercher, who's there in the, what color is your shirt? Yellow. We're co-chairs of the fellows. Most of you probably have some vague awareness that there's something called a CAUTHE fellow, and there's actually 21 of us, believe it or not, a subsection, a subgroup of who have agreed to be part of this discussion today. So this idea came up that we needed to be trying to give back as a group as well as individuals. We do quite a few things individually as fellows, but we thought it would be nice to do a panel discussion, and we wanted to have people that were physically here. So there are many people that would have liked to have been on the panel today but couldn't get here today. So I'm going to invite the four panelists to come and sit up here for the duration of the panel. And then I'll introduce them each to you, and I'll explain how it's all going to work. So can you please come up, Judith, Kirsten, Bob, and Noel. Find your favorite seat on the stage. Oh, you got the first choice. So what's going to happen today is, yeah, boy, girl. What's going to happen today, and online we have Richard Aquino, and I had a chat yesterday, and he's online, and he's going to help me monitor questions and comments in the chat line online. And he's going to, I told him to interrupt me if I forgot to pay attention to online. So I'll pay attention to you guys. So we do have four speakers. Some of them will speak briefly, and some of them will speak until I tell them to be quiet. But nobody's going to speak more than about 10 or 11 minutes or something like that. And you'll have a little bit of time to ask questions or make comments to that person, but we want to allow most of the time at the end for a panel discussion. So that, I hope that is okay with everyone and that they'll get a lot out of that. And you guys can hear me over there out in the virtual world. You're going okay? Yeah, okay, good. So I'm going to introduce, and Judith, I think you can speak from where you are because you've got a mic, so you can see. So you can see what you're doing. So you don't actually have to jump up here if you don't want. So the first speaker is Judith Mair, who's an associate professor at UQ Business School. I'll just give a brief 2-sentence introduction about each person. So Judith, most of you, some of you would be aware of Judith's work, maybe a lot of you. She does work on the positive impacts of tourism and events in particular on communities and societies which host tourism and events. And she works on projects like the Olympic Games legacies, and she's particularly interested in something called social connectivity. So maybe we'll find out that that's what she's going to talk about, because the theme of today is about building researcher identity, particularly the identity of PhD students and ECRs, but I'm sure we all are still working on our identity. So we can all learn something from that. So thank you very much, Judith. We'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Can I just have a, no, I'm not going to stand up. I just want to see if the clicker works before I do anything else. Oh, excellent. All right. So thank you very much, Betty. Thank you, CAUTHE. Thank you, Erica, for putting this on. I have had a very brief chat with my panelists this morning, and we have all made the very astute observation that most of you in the room are not ECRs or HDRs, and therefore there might be, well, certainly from my point of view, there might be a little bit of changing what I was going to say, because I don't want it to sound patronizing to those of you who are, associate professors and things like that. But I think that the idea of identity is important for all of us. And I actually think that it's quite unlikely that anybody in this room, if you ask them, could give you that elevator pitch that says what their identity is just off the top of your head. So whether you're a PhD student or an ECR, or whether you're a DVC or a VC, you probably still got questions as to exactly who am I and what do I do? So as a way to start off this panel, what I thought might be an idea would be just to talk a little bit about what identity might be, rather than, sort of tell you what your identity should be, because I don't think that that's something anybody else can tell you. So when we talk about identity, there's a number of different ways of thinking about that, but the fundamental question is basically, well, who are you? Who are you as a person, as a human, as a researcher, as a whatever? And it's important, I think, to remember, and this one does go out to all of you, especially those of you who are more senior and who are very, very busy with your work life. You're not just an academic, or you're not just a researcher, and you're not just a student, you're not just a PhD student. You're a whole load of different things. So whilst research, academia, studies, theories are a part of your life, they're not who you are. They're only part of who you are. And I think it's worth remembering that. So we will be concentrating more on the researcher identity today, but I just wanted to flag that at the beginning, that you're more than just a researcher. You're more than just a student. You're more than just an academic. We're, husbands, wives, partners, friends, whatever, we're lots of different things. We're mothers, we're fathers. So a researcher identity is only part of who we are. When we think about how do you work out who you are, and it sounds like a silly question, but actually most of us don't spend much time doing this. What makes you you? What is it about you that makes you not the same as the person next door? And working out what your identity is in life as well as a researcher is about really understanding yourself and what makes you tick. So we often hear about, what's the passion? What you're passionate about, and that's often your researcher identity. That's what you've chosen to do as a PhD student, for example. But what actually makes you tick, that's part of what's your identity. Oh, Noel, are you not on camera? Oh, bless. Move up. We can move up. I know. Sorry about these. Obviously people in the room can see what's happening, but online we're just all shuffling up a little bit to make sure that Noel's on camera, because that would be very sad to leave him out. So back to thinking about your identity. So lots and lots of things feed into what's your identity. But it's worth remembering that you are who you are because of a lot of different things, but you're not your parents. You're not where you were born. You're not what you do for a living. It's part of your identity, and it's things that you might identify with. So I'm Scottish, identify with that, but it's not all I am. Obviously, I'm also Australian. But everybody has things that make them unique. No, honestly. Everyone has things that make them unique. And those things are around what you value, your passion is, what your interests are, what things are that make you who you are. And that's kind of what I want you to be thinking about when we talk about identity. So there are things that influence us that we can't really do anything about. We live in societies that have rules and norms. We come from backgrounds that are more constricting or less constricting. We have religious beliefs. We have all sorts of things that may be outside external influences on who we are and how we turn out, but they don't actually make up who you are and who you want to be. Some of the things you can think about when you're trying to work out what is your identity. What are you good at? What are you good at? What needs some work? So, there are some things that we know internally that there are things that we're good at, but we also know that there's things that we could be working harder on. So that might be something that helps you to identify yourself a little bit. And what are your core values? Again, for the more senior in the audience, probably not something we do very often. Sit down and really properly think about, what do I actually value? What's the most important thing to me? Is it honesty? Is it recognition from other people and self-esteem? Is it my family? Is it making money? There's lots of underpinning things that go into thinking about who you are. One of the biggest issues that I think we have as academics, which is probably more relevant or feels more relevant when you're in the student category or an ECR, but is actually just as important to the rest of us, is the limiting beliefs that we have. So, imposter syndrome type thing. I'm too young to do that. I'm too old to do that. I'm not smart enough to do that. I don't have the right skill set to do that. These are the sorts of things that limit us. And they're not necessarily helpful beliefs, but they're things that we all have. And of course, another way of thinking about it is your personality. So, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Do you focus more on sensing versus intuition? So these words here come from the Myers-Briggs inventory, but there's lots of other ways of thinking about personality. Are you more interested in judging or perceiving? But all of these things create our identity, and all of these things we can think about, and we can actually start to make up a jigsaw puzzle of who we are. Now, there is some research. Now, I believe that Noel's going to talk a bit more about research, so I don't want to talk about it too much, but just some headline points is that we transition amongst identities all the time. So when I'm at home, I'm mum. When I come to work, I might be an associate professor, or I might be a colleague, or I might be a friend, or, when I stand up in front of people here, I'm allegedly somebody you should be listening to. We have lots of different identities and personas, and that's okay, that's normal. But one of the difficulties that we have is balancing those different identities that we have with the fact that external factors change as well. So our identity is based on what other people are doing as much as what we think ourselves. So, maybe in a room full of friends, you are quite an extrovert type person, but actually in a room full of people you don't know, you're not that extrovert after all. Maybe you do feel a little bit more introverted. So we have to grapple with what other people expect from us as our identity as much as what we want it to be. Your identity develops over time. Certainly I feel like a different person to how I did when I did my PhD. So things do change over time, and that's fine. But generally your identity is personally constructed. There are some questions over exactly how much it changes. So some researchers will say that your underpinning identity doesn't change that much, but the way you manifest to external circumstances makes you look as if you've changed a little bit. So there are some different ways of looking at that in terms of research. So just to round off, really, I suppose things for you to think about in terms of how you identify yourself as a researcher. So you might identify yourself by the stage you're in. So, whether I'm a student, I'm an early career researcher, I'm a learner or an apprentice, or I'm an established academic. You might be having days, as we all do, possibly not some of my other esteemed colleagues, but the rest of us, where we all go, oh, I can't do this. I don't even know what I am. I'm an imposter. We all have different days where identity is a little bit different. But you could also define yourself by your philosophical approach to research. So you might say, I'm a qualitative researcher, I'm a quantitative researcher. I am, my epistemology is this, my ontology is that, axionology, whatever they are. I'm getting all my words confused. But those are ways that you can also define yourself as a researcher. So that there's not one easy way to do that, but there's lots of ways that you can think about doing it, you know, sort of ideas that you can take for defining yourself. And just a little bit of summing up there, no matter what anybody else tells you, be yourself, everybody else is already taken. Okay, so Oscar Wilde told us that, so I think we're probably happy enough to believe him. So that's just my contribution to kicking this off as to how we might think about identities.
Okay, I was going to take questions or comments if anybody has anything burning that they want to say. Otherwise, we might just carry on. Anybody want to hit me with anything? And I'm looking at Richard too, if he comes up with anything, but otherwise we might just carry on. Thank you very much. That's a really good big picture thing. And we did get some very pointed things at the end there about, you know, how you might define yourself as a researcher. And yes, it does change over time. I guarantee it. All right, so we're going to follow that. We're just, these people are very respectful doing female male stuff here. So Kirsten's second, and Kirsten is a professor of tourism at Curtin University. You probably know her name because she is the immediate past chair of CAUTHE. So there's an identity for you. Expertise, I think of Kirsten's expertise very much in terms of volunteer tourism because I've read lots of her work. She's the lead editor of the Handbook of Volunteering in Tourism, Sport and Events, published by Routledge. And she's also done quite a bit of stuff in her home province of WA, both in the sector, the research sector, but also in the more applied sector, industry sector. And she's had lots of external funding, things like ARC, International Olympic Committee, and federal and state government organizations. So I think Kirsten will tell you a bit more about herself, but I'll leave it at that. And thank you, Kirsten.
Right, is that on okay?
Yep.
Yep, I did click the on button. So
Yes, you're
that's my first test, if I can get the microphone on. So thank you very much, Judith. That was a fantastic introduction. So just noting that in terms of the presentations we developed, that a lot of it is aimed at, I guess, the HDR, the ECR audience, but I think it'd be really interesting for, you know, more experienced and senior colleagues in the room to have some, you know, to have a discussion about what are some of these other points that we can advise and how we could help colleagues in terms of developing their careers. And much of this was me reflecting back on perhaps things that I felt I should have done or would have made it a lot easier for me if I had. I'm going to start by just talking about my own research for identity. Betty's given a great introduction. And I would definitely describe myself as an applied researcher. You know, most of the research I do is in partnership with organizations, whether they're not-for-profits or government at different levels, or, you know, sometimes even commercial organizations, but mostly not. And particularly in two fields. So yes, I was chair of CAUTHE. I do research on tourism, particularly events and festivals, but I also do a lot of work on volunteering, which is unconnected to tourism. And I think that has some really strong benefits and downsides. I mean, one of the downsides is that in terms of things like publications and grants, you've got two fields. So perhaps you become less well known in each field because of that. I find it more enjoyable. There can sometimes be clashes. You hopefully have heard that we'll be hosting CAUTHE next year, our first face-to-face conference since 2020 in Fremantle. And a couple of days ago, I was in, it was only yesterday morning, my goodness. I was in Canberra having a meeting with Volunteering Australia, and they want to hold their National Volunteering Conference the same week as CAUTHE. And they're saying to me, is there no way you could come? Is there no way you can come to Canberra to the volunteering conference? I'm like, not really. I'm actually chairing this conference and it's going to be really hard. And also to get to Perth from Canberra, you know, there's one flight a day and it takes 4 hours plus the time difference. You know, and so there are times when those identities can clash and can make it a bit of a challenge. I mean, actually looking at changing conference dates, which is very nice of them, but I did tell them it wasn't necessary, that, you know, obviously would be a fantastic conference anyway. So that was a little bit of an introduction about some of the benefits and draw cards of having maybe some of those multiple identities as well. So I'm just going to, I can't really see the slides, so I'm just going to move on. So I have moved that on to what I have down as slide 2. So what does it say? Yes, that's exactly the slide I wanted. That's fantastic. So I guess I was thinking, you know, we talk about identities and what kind of identity you like, but Judith talked about, you know, obviously our academic, our work identity is just one of our identities. So I would say to, you know, junior colleagues or colleagues starting out, one of the key things is, well, where do you want to live? Where do you want to work? What kind of place do you want to live? So I live in Perth and I love Perth. It's a fantastic place. My kids are at great schools, which they might not have those opportunities in other parts of the world, so, or other states and cities, I'm not sure. So there's a lot to do with, you know, where do you, what kind of life do you want to have? It's not just about what you want your research identity to be. And we also need to be aware that different countries and different universities and higher education systems have different values and different expectations in terms of their research. So I work at an ATN university, so technology university is a very applied university. Our university is very focused on industry research, working with industry in terms of promotion. Things like building relationships with industry is listed as one of the criteria you can put down. So you don't even have to just demonstrate the outcomes, because they're aware that it takes a while to develop those outcomes. So, you know, thinking about, you know, you might think, and when we're going to hear from a colleague at the University of Queensland, which is a group of 8 university, and, you know, could well have quite different expectations or requirements from, say, an ATN university. Now, I'm also aware, you know, we've been through, at Curtin, we've been through the usual accreditations. We are all going through like AACSB and ECRs and those different associations, and they have different expectations, and you get assessed by people from other universities around the world, and it gives you a really good sense of what are their priorities. So, you know, we had a colleague from Europe doing our ECRs accreditation, quite clearly coming from a very different research environment. You know, one that was not about research income. In Australia, our universities are not very well funded by government, and we have to, you know, certainly my university, I have to bring in the money to fund my research. So where it was very clear that that was not valued by this colleague from Europe, that they were only very focused on more traditional academic metrics. So, you know, thinking about where in the world you want to work, and therefore what kind of research expectations will there be at that kind of institution that you might want to work at. So now I'm going to move on. So this should be my slide 3. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I know we've got a very illustrious group of colleagues in the room, but many, you know, professors, people holding very high positions at their universities, leadership positions in the community, in different academic associations. But, you know, when you become an academic, there's no requirement to progress all the way through to professor. You know, every PhD student doesn't have to become the vice chancellor. It's, you know, I have many colleagues who've got very full personal lives and activities outside of work. They've got very fulfilling research careers, but they're quite happy at the level they're at. You know, maybe the expectations become harder as you move through. Maybe they've got, you know, they only want to work part-time, or they want to, you know, they've got children at different stages they have to look after. And not only do you not have to progress, but we see colleagues within our field make really important contributions to research at all levels. So there isn't any requirement to move through, and the quality of your work is not reflected on by your title or by the position that you have within your institution. So I think that's a really important point to do. I've noted down here, high level appointments aren't always as good as you think they will be. So I, you know, for a while I had, and I really enjoyed parts of it. I was the Dean of Research for my faculty for a few years, and I stepped down a year ago. And I learned so much doing it, but I did not want to carry on in that role. I wanted to, mostly because you spend all your time in meetings and you don't actually have time to do any research anyway. And you can't be a dean of research if you're not delivering research yourself, in my view. I also wanted to comment about teaching. So we've been asked to talk about the researcher identity, but as you know, those of us in the room who are already working in the sector will know that primarily you will get your jobs through teaching. You know, it's the teaching that brings in the income that pays for your salary. Primarily, that's how it works. And you know, we have a number of colleagues within our within CAUTHE, within our field, who have had extremely important and successful careers through teaching, scholarship, and innovation, and that is really important. And so that in itself is a researcher identity, research on understanding more about teaching, understanding more about scholarship, and that also has a lot of longevity in terms of careers. So I'm not sure if this works much at other universities. At Curtin, we have people who are teaching academics who don't actually have a researching workload allocation, but they have an allocation for teaching scholarship. And you know, but people get promoted all the way through to professor through that route. So it's certainly a very viable position. Now this slide, so you've got the job, and this is about how to shape your career at your chosen institution. So there was really some pointers about, you know, if I was moving.
Move up one more.
Has it not moved?
Oh, there you go. Oh, no. Yes.
Have I got? Yes, yes, this is the slide I was hoping it would be. That's good. So it's just really about, you know, how to get things done. And this is what I really learned when I was Dean of Research, because I got to meet everyone and find and meet people from all the other faculties and see what they were doing and learn from them. And I wish I'd known this when I started out, to you know, go over to my research office and meet the people and find out, how do I do this and how do I do that, and how do things work. And I don't think I can stress enough the importance of building good relationships with all of these professional staff who will support you. It's so important. You know, when you need something done really quickly, they will push the boat out for you if you've got a good relationship with them. And we know these people. Many academics do not value these people. Many of them do not give them, you know, the respect that they deserve, and get to know them as colleagues, you know, as people. They're not just the person who does the post. They're the person that will find that lost thesis that you've got to mark that has disappeared into university postal system. And they're also, you know, they've got their family and they've got various things. So getting to know those people, I think, is really, really important. I mean, you've got to know your academic colleagues, but the support structure is extremely important. So where am I? I've only got a couple more slides. So, this should be. That's right. So I've mentioned that at an ATN university, we really have to sort of fund our own research. And I think this is always a challenge, as to how do you balance the publications, the grants, the PhD supervision, the increasing amount of engagement and impact type activities that we're required to do. And, you know, I know Bob's going to talk much more about publications because of his enormous expertise and experience in that area. But I think it's important, you know, publications are our currency. We've got to have the publications. But in Australian universities, at least, most of them, it's not enough. You've got to have the grants as well. You've got to have the research income. That's really important. And you've got to engage with end users. So that's the bit I enjoy, is engaging with end users. I find that much more enjoyable, talking to people who might actually do something with the work that I've done, rather than just talking to, you know, I love talking to other academics as well, but, you know, it's seeing some actual, will there be some actual outcomes from my research? And I had a chat while I was preparing this, with colleagues from New Zealand, and they talked to me about how research income isn't quite as critical currently there, but for them, what is really important is their engagement with Maori culture and Maori language, and that you would be expected at a New Zealand university probably at quite a junior level in an interview, to talk about how you've engaged with the Waitangi Treaty, for example, which I thought was really interesting. I know at our universities, the importance of understanding and collaborating and engaging with Indigenous knowledge and culture and research is becoming much more important, but it's at another level in New Zealand. So just to sort of highlight those differences between different universities. Has this moved on?
Yeah, we better finish up quickly.
Oh, okay. Mentoring and networks, it's really important. Bob's going to talk about that as well, so I will move on. But not just being a mentor being mentored yourself, but mentoring others. So from at any level, I know very junior colleagues who mentor other people as well. So I think that's really important to make. And the last slide is just that it's just really gets what Judith talked about. So doing well at research, it's hard work. It's a lot of work. You'll spend a lot of your working life doing this. But whatever your research identity is, make sure, because you're going to spend so much time doing it, make sure you enjoy it. Make sure you actually enjoy doing the work, or quite frankly, what's the point? So that's my final point.
That's very good. Thank you. Sorry to rush you a bit. So much of what both of you have said has resonated with me. And I was thinking about the institution thing, because I moved around to several different universities in my career, and every one of them had a different, climate. And also your point about when you're the director of research, you don't actually do very much research. It sounds like a great title at the time, but then after about 5 years, you sort of go, actually, I just want to be doing it. So yeah, it's a good point. All right, so I was going to take questions. Richard, are you okay if I just keep going without, does anybody have burning questions online that you want me to feed to one of these two speakers, or can I keep going?
Kia ora, Betty. There's a comment that's made by Tracy. I think this was directed on Judith's presentation. She said that when you are doing a PhD, people are really interested. When you have one, no one really cares. So identity beyond qualifications, positions, etc., is also important.
You want to comment on that? That was a good, very insightful comment. I think we'll just take that as a comment. It's a good one. Okay, any others, or can I keep going?
I think let's move on to the next one.
Okay, I'll keep going, or what?
Yep, keep going. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks for that. Okay, so Professor Bob McKercher, again, another name most of you will be familiar with. Professor of tourism currently at UQ, but spent many years at Hong Kong Polytechnic and probably built up much of his research profile in his time there. But previously to that, I first met Bob when he was working at Charles Sturt University and didn't even have a PhD. Can you believe there was a time when he didn't have a PhD? So over his career, obviously, like these other people, but probably more than other people, I would say Bob is quite eclectic in his research interests: tourism development, cultural, nature-based tourism, tourism education, lots of other areas. He's very widely published on editorial boards and that kind of thing. So I'll turn it over to Bob. Thanks.
Thank you, Betty, and thank you for inviting me today. We're talking about identity, and if you ask me my professional identity, I'm a tourism guy, and I can't be any more specific than that. My personal identity is as a husband, as a father, and as a lover of dogs. Don't ask me about my geographic identity, because Betty mentioned that. I'm Canadian by birth. I spent 10 years in country New South Wales. I spent most of the last 25 years in Hong Kong, and now I'm back in Australia. So geographically, I'm confused. And I'd like to just talk about some of the things that especially new and early career researchers need to do to think about how to develop their career and how to have an exciting and a very rewarding career path. Now, I want to start with the good news. And the good news is universities are hiring again. Griffith has advertised a number of jobs recently. I was talking to the head of the business school and at UQ, and they're going to be about 15 lecturer A B positions advertised shortly across all the disciplines within the business school. Hong Kong PolyU has got at least 8 vacancies available for new staff. Institute for Tourism Studies has got vacancies available, and there are lots and lots of jobs available. The other thing too is that being an academic is an incredibly rewarding lifestyle, and it's an avocation as much as a vocation. And the other really good piece of news is that you're really only limited by your imagination. And if you have an inquiring mind, you're going to have a very productive academic career. But the world has changed. And the first generation of tourism academics came from their core disciplines and studied tourism to understand their discipline better. Many of us on the panel today are the second generation of tourism academics. And we came from industry, and we studied tourism better to understand how industry worked. And when I first started at Charles Sturt Uni, there were only 3 tourism academics in Australia with PhDs. There was Philip Pierce, there was Michael Hall, and Betty Weiler. And the rest of us had master's degrees and industry experience, which got us as senior lecturers, or if you just had an undergraduate degree, you could get in as a lecturer B and get tenure after a few years. Now, with the new generation of tourism academics, you're expected to be fully fledged scholars by the time you graduate, and you're expected to have a good publications record and a good teaching record. The advantage of the current generation is that you probably have better academic qualifications than most of us had when we started. The disadvantage is that many of you have never worked in industry, and that many of you don't have a strong single disciplinary background. And so these are skills that you're going to have to develop as your career evolves. And certainly getting involved with industry, building links with industry, and building a research identity is all part and parcel of that. Now, there are a whole series of issues that you're going to face as you develop your career. And the first thing is that what counts as research has changed. Again, when I started, a CAUTHE refereed conference paper counted as much as a journal article in Annals of Tourism Research in the various research assessment exercises that were undertaken. My colleagues, former colleagues, Rob Law, Kay Chon, and a few others took a look at what counted as research, and what counted 10 years ago as research was almost anything. Now the field has narrowed incredibly, and what counts is A and A-star journal papers, and maybe even A-star journal papers, depending on where you're, what university you're in. Books, if they're research books, but not textbooks. Book chapters don't count. Conference papers don't count unless you can build them up into journal articles. And indeed, in some institutions now, even edited books don't count, because the feeling is that the actual contributors to the chapter make a stronger intellectual contribution to the book than the editors of the book. So what counts now is much narrower. And I have to raise a cautionary point here, and that is far too many junior academics are chasing the vaunted H index and are chasing to be any author on any paper. And what's counting increasingly is you have to be amongst the top couple of authors on the papers for your contribution to be recognized. And don't worry about your citation index. Don't worry about how many papers you're going to publish, because that's something that reflects progress in your career, not the initial stages of your career. And in terms of citation counts, some of the research that I've done with my former colleague Vince Tung shows that it takes 4 or 5 years for a paper to be accepted. So don't worry about your citation count after 1 year, because it's probably going to be pretty low. There are also some things about fully fledged academics that now have to be changed. This is actually me when I was a uni student. The only thing that hasn't changed are the eyebrows. Everything else has changed. But now you're expected to be a qualified scholar when you graduate. The advantage that most of us had is we could spend 7 or 8 years and learn our craft. Now you've got to land with your feet on the ground. And there's pressure on you to gift authorships to colleagues. There's pressure on you from white bulls, especially some of you who've got not very ethical thesis supervisors who may demand that their names appear on your papers, even if they've had no contribution to them. And I've actually had former colleagues who insisted their names appeared first on papers, even though they did nothing. And even co-supervisors who were only on advisory committees insisted their names appear on papers. So you have to watch out for that. Now, there are 10 steps to a satisfying career, but actually there are really only 6 steps that I want to talk about. And the first step is you've got 5 years after you graduate. That's your golden window of opportunity. This is where you can create a publications profile based primarily on your thesis, but also other research. This is where you can develop your teaching career and your teaching expertise. This is where you can become known. This is where you can develop your network. Don't think that you've got a 35-year career to do that. Make the most that you can in your first 5 years. And I've had former students of mine who in the first few years, I wrote, this person's got tremendous potential. You need to hire him or her. After 5 years, the referee's letter becomes a little bit different. And in some instances, I've had to refuse to write a referee's letter because after 5 years, the great potential has become non-potential. So make the most of your first 5 years, that golden window when opportunities present themselves. You need to develop research focus or research focuses, but probably no more than 1 or 2 initially in your career. Over time, your research interests will change. And that's a natural evolution of your career. But if you put your name on every paper that comes through, regardless of what the topic is, when you go to apply for a job, people will say, what are you known for? And you'll say, well, you know, I've written on blah, 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 blah. Well, what are you known for? Well, really nothing. And so increasingly, universities are looking for specific skill sets and specific skill vacancies that need to be filled. You're going to have to make sure that you have that focus that can satisfy that research skill set or that teaching vacancy that needs to be filled. We are public intellectuals. Our salary is paid for by the government. And as public intellectuals, our job is both knowledge creation and knowledge dissemination. And the most direct way that we can disseminate knowledge is through teaching. And teaching is a really important aspect of your job. Don't treat it as a hygiene thing that needs to be done. Treat it as a core skill that you need to develop. And in fact, teaching is really rewarding when you're standing in front of a class and you can see that the class is just engrossed in what you're saying. It's a really fantastic feeling. Mind you, the other side of the coin is when you're standing in front of the class and everybody's eyes glass over, then that's the time to take a break, go back, get some enthusiasm, and come back and try to engross the students again. The other thing that I found about teaching is that teaching has really helped my research career. Because when you stand in front of a class and you teach accepted knowledge, and in the back of your mind, the accepted knowledge doesn't seem to make sense, then that opens a research opportunity to scratch below the surface and to see if there is any substance behind that accepted knowledge. And certainly in our field, much of our accepted knowledge is treated as dogma, but there's very little substance to it. And so that opens some really good critical research opportunities that, again, can help your teaching in the future, but can also help advance the field of study.
Just 1 or 2 minutes, Bob.
Okay. The other thing is to learn how to write. And I'm a 12 draft writer. As somebody said, you need to drink 12 before you start drafting, or it takes about 12 drafts before a paper is ready to go. And don't think that you can just write something really fast and submit it to a journal. Journals these days are looking for reasons to reject papers, not for reasons to accept papers. The top tier journals have a 5 to 7% acceptance rate. So if you're in the top 10%, you're not going to get accepted. So make sure you write. And of course, you have to be mobile. Look at the 5 members on the panel today. 4 of us are foreigners. We've all had to move to, in some cases, multiple countries to develop our careers. Don't think that you're going to get a job in your hometown. If you do, then you're going to be stuck on the casual career path forever. And this is an avocation. If it's just a job, you're never going to be a good academic. You have to have passion for what you're doing, teaching, research, service, whatever. And probably the most important piece of advice that I want to give everybody is don't work weekends. When you're at work, work hard. When you're not at work, don't work. Take your full leave. You need that to refresh your brain. And finally, have a good time, and thank you very much.
Nobody told me that bit about not working weekends. I wish somebody had told me that. Yeah, I was thinking about your comment about teaching, and I was thinking about some of the, I'm going to reveal something about Michael Hall that you might not know. When Michael and I first started our careers together at this university, and the first books he wrote were because he had to teach those subjects. And there weren't any books written at that stage. And he went, oh, I think I'll write a book on the introduction to tourism. And same with me. I edited a book on ecotourism because we had to teach a subject on it in special interest tourism, actually not ecotourism. And then I suddenly became known as a special interest tourism person, but it was because I had to write a book to teach it. Okay, so the last speaker, I'm not going to, hang on. I'm not going to take the time for questions because we're going to run out of time for the panel. So Noel, I want to make sure you have a few minutes to speak. So thank you for being last. Noel Scott is adjunct professor of tourism management in Sustainable Research Center at the University of Sunshine Coast, but he's also affiliated with Edith Cowan as an adjunct, Edith Cowan in WA. And another guy that I would say has quite eclectic research interests, tourism experiences, destination management, and marketing. And another person whose name you would know because he speaks quite frequently and he's now quite involved in consulting. So a number of us that are fellows, and Noel's one of them, have retired from university life, but we seem to be still working and doing consulting and things that we love, I guess, is what it comes down to what Bob said, that probably because we love it. So over to you, Noel. Thank you.
Thanks, Betty. And looking around the audience, it seems that PhD students are getting younger and younger. I see a PhD student here who looks very young to me, but I think it's the ballerina costume. I think that is intriguing.
You wish.
So it's great that we have a wide audience. It's wonderful. Thank you for coming. Briefly, when I was thinking about this topic, my first answer is, what is an identity? And I would say I don't know, because this comes back to theory and concepts. So many of the discussions that we've had talk about values and personality and limiting beliefs and so on. And all of those things are concepts that come from social psychology or sociology. And I suspect that they're old concepts and not well related with more recent theories in neuroscience or cognitive psychology. You see, the idea that you can have multiple identities is incoherent on the basis that you only have one brain. So if your identity is something that belongs in your brain, then you can only have one brain. And so you can't have multiple identities. You can have various memories and skills in processing those memories, but by their nature, they're one thing. You can have many different learnings, which may be incoherent with one another, but you only have one brain, so you only have one identity.
Speak for yourself.
No, so Bob, I'm speaking not for myself, but from the idea of theory and learnings from cognitive psychology. In terms of university researchers and what the identity is, to me, it comes back to what is research. And research, in my opinion, is different from knowledge generation. So research is about answering new questions. It's about knowledge we don't already have, which is different from teaching. Teaching is providing people with knowledge we already have. Research is finding new knowledge and testing to see if it's right or wrong. And this, of course, is the problem with the university system at the moment. It's perverse in that it's directing us towards more teaching, that is, reproducing old ideas rather than creating new ones. So to me, as a researcher, my values, my personality, my learned habits and thinking are that a researcher is a person who conceptualizes and tests concepts into and tries to seek new knowledge. So the more you're directed towards teaching, the less you are necessarily doing this conceptualization of things. And so my suggestion is, if you want to think about a researcher's identity, you can think about your identity, but if you want to think about your identity as a researcher, then it must be about creating and asking and always thinking, is this knowledge that I've got new, interesting? Is it something that I can advance, create new theoretical ideas? And of course, this is the problem with tourism at the moment, is that much of our theory, as I think Bob was saying, is old stuff. We are directing it at the moment towards creating the idea of tourism as a body of knowledge, which is, in my opinion, wrong. And in fact, we do need to go back to the original disciplines and get those ideas which are new and interesting and apply them in the tourism area. So that's, I think that's about everything. Generally, the only other comment I'd make is that there was a lot of normative stuff. If you want to be successful, then here are things to do. And that's good, but that's different from what your identity is. Okay, so you can think about your identity as being you. There's the world out there which you have to sort of succeed in, but don't give up your personal values or beliefs, because those are the things that ultimately will motivate you. So your, from a cognitive psychology perspective, your goals, the things that are of value to you, are the things that create emotion and if you're successful, and frustration if you're not. So if you have strong goals, then you will have that passion. And unfortunately, if you're in a system where you're directed towards doing things which are not related to your goals, then you'll have frustration and problems, as many of us might have experienced. Thank you, Bill.
So as you can hear, there's some differences of opinion among these four people about identity, although you did, I have to say, you did come back full circle to some of the things that Judith was saying at the beginning about the idea of your core identity. I'm going to invite questions and comments now, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, but Richard is kind of monitoring online, and I guess if people have put up a virtual flag to say they wanted to ask a question, or if they put something in the chat line, I've asked him to interrupt me. Before I go to you, Richard, I'd like to go to the room, the real people in this room, and see, and can you let me know if you want to direct the question at a particular person? Anne.
I've got a question to the panel.
Okay. Hang on, we're just moving a microphone to the speaker so that you guys can hear.
Turned on.
Anne Hardy.
Thanks. I really enjoyed that session. And I still regard myself as an ECR, which says something in itself. But I had a question with all this sort of the raising of the bar of the expectations of academics. I think a lot of things that are missing in our conversation are when things go wrong. So failing research projects, boredom, and burnout. And I'm just interested in your thoughts, you know, having had long, illustrious careers on, you know, your thoughts on that and how people can navigate that. Because I think we all get bored.
Mm-hmm.
Many of our projects fail. And we also often have burnout as our interests wane in particular areas, and just your reflections on that.
Okay, well, thank you, Anne. And if you could tie that into research identity, go for it.
I'll start with that. I'm putting this down as a red letter day, as I've now officially been called incoherent by esteemed professor. And I feel quite incoherent many days, so it's probably pretty accurate. I think the thing that we need to think about, and it sort of links to identity, but a bit tangential, is the idea of resilience and what resilience means and what resilience looks like. Many of us are accustomed to, and I'm sure even Professor Bob here, who is very, very illustrious, I'm sure has had rejections. And, you know, it's something that doesn't get any easier, really. In some ways it does, because you get used to it. But, you know, with the first time you get a paper rejected, it's horrendous. And you think, well, then what? Why have I been doing this for? What is the point in this? Everybody, you know, hates my work, it's rubbish. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily get easy. And so all that you've done is that you've built a certain level of tolerance to that. And I think it takes a while to get that level of tolerance to being told that something's not good enough, or being told that, you know, you've not done it the right way, or not getting the money. It's a hard industry to be in. I don't think I know of other industries where you are consistently told all the time you're not good enough. You know, there are many industries where you get a promotion because your boss watches you and thinks you're doing a great job. That doesn't happen to us. We have to, you know, practically give up a kidney to get promoted. It's hard, and it's not something that I think anyway, that most people are necessarily born with a level of resilience that allows you to do this. I think it's something that you have to work on and you have to build over time. So I think that's probably my message, if you want to call that, is it certainly for an early career researcher, it's not going to come easily, and it is hard, and we all feel it.
Work on it. Yeah, that's right. Anybody else want to comment on Anne's question before we move on to another question? Yes, no, and then Bob.
I feel very lucky. I had 3 careers before I became an academic. And my last career was in industry, running a trade association of wilderness lodges. And I burnt out in that job. It was a 24/7 job. And I did not sleep in my own bed for 45% of the time because I was on the road all the time. So I learned from that when I became an academic that this is what I want to be when I grow up. And so I have passion for the job, but also that's why I said, don't work weekends and make sure that you take your full annual leave, because you really need that time off just to give your brain a rest.
Yeah, you get better at it that as a result. Yeah, no.
I think it comes back to what you mean by burnout. So this is one of those words which we use, but what is it? What is the concept of burnout? Now, there's a couple of relevant issues. When we were foraging prehistoric animals, we would look for food, and as we explored an area and it turned out to be not as actually as the average of the terrain, we would move on to another area. So the idea of moving on is quite natural and related to your goals. Secondly, clearly burnout is not a necessary thing. Many people have careers without burnout. Okay, so what you're talking about is what are the characteristics that do not lead to this particular condition, whatever it is. I would say that it relates to receiving particular rewards at certain times, so that your goal achievement is giving you the emotional responses which you need to continue. So in that, if you interpret it that way, now it may be physiological in some way, that in a certain job it's very tiring and therefore you can't achieve your goals. But I don't think it has any particular inherent features. I think it comes back to motivating yourself by fulfilling your goals and receiving the feedback. Does that make sense?
Okay. Just before I come back to this group, Richard, you got any comments there or questions there online that I should know about?
There are a couple of comments that were directed to Bob's presentation. Would you like me to read them out?
Yes, please.
Yes. So from Tracy Dixon, she said, being curious is a great quality of aspiring and interesting academics. From Naomi Dale, she said, impressive hairdo. From Carrie King,
impressive
hairdo, great
said,
advice. And from Simone, she commented, mobility is easier for some than others.
That's a very good point, isn't it? Mobility is easier for some than others. And that includes not only moving jobs, but being able to go to international conferences. Like there was a time in my career where I just couldn't do that because I was a single parent and I just couldn't go to places, and that closed down some opportunities, I guess, for me. But as comes back to what you said, you have more than one identity.
Yeah, there are two elephants in the room that I think need to be addressed. And I'm not sure how best to approach them, so I'll be not backwards about coming forward. And the first thing is that, yes, mobility is much easier for some people than other people. And depending on your family situation, you may or may not be mobile. And given that 3/4 of our students are women, it tends to be men who see themselves as being more mobile than women. And so this is a reality that you may have to deal with. The other big elephant in the room is the divorce rate seems to be quite high amongst many senior academics. And I don't know if that has to do with the nature of our job. The repartnering rate also seems to be extremely high, but I think it may be one of the issues that will arise as one's career advances. And so people are going to have to make decisions about family and mobility that will affect careers. And I don't know if anybody else wants to make any comment about that, but it's a challenging balance that we all have to face. And I know I've gone through that and now have a nice wife, but but it was easier for me to move when I was single.
Thanks, Bob. Kirsten.
Yeah, I'm just going to comment on that. So, so far I'm not divorced, but I just, yeah, there are a couple of points. I mean, firstly, while yes, it is a challenge in terms of mobility and things, in other ways, academia is very flexible when you have young children and, you know, especially at the moment working at home. And I think, although we can't necessarily travel, I mean, I'm not particularly keen on the idea of doing lots of international travel for many reasons, not just for children at the moment. You know, just because it's a different field in the volunteering field, you know, at the moment it's the big, or a couple of weeks ago, it was the big international volunteering conference in Montreal. So, you know, I did not go to Montreal, but there are other ways you can really engage with international bodies that don't involve having to travel, you know, with the international associations. So I think, which are probably more available now. So I'm involved in international mentoring of members through that association, which we can do now without having to travel. So I think there are possibly some ways of exploring how to build that international identity without having to necessarily travel. But I do think it is very important when you're kind of picking your partner. You know, mine's been very supportive. He's also an academic, so in some ways that helps, but in a slightly different field, which I think is a kind of healthier approach. So that I mean, we're not quite as insular as we could be.
Other comments, questions? Yes. Yeah, Elspeth first. Probably you had your hand up first, Elspeth.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about my career over the last, since 1991, so about whatever that is, 30 or 31 years. And I was thinking, someone asked me recently, what are you most proud about your career? And I said, my longevity. And they said, how did you manage to survive such a long time? And I said, because I have watched empires rise and fall around me, and I have chosen my battles. So I think that's one of the things of survival. I think the 3 Ps we've spoken about before as a female academic: professorship, partner, progeny. Hold on, what's the word for children? P, progeny. Yeah. Very unusual to have all 3 at the same time. So that's something to think about. But I actually had 2 comments about what you were saying. I took some notes. One of the things you said, Judith, was about your identity. And what I've noticed over the years is you have to be all things to all people. So you have to be a very sort of, very like studious and sit by yourself and do your research and so on. But then half an hour later, you're in front of a class of 100 students performing, which is actually on the sort of the personality. Isn't that the opposite of, introvert, extrovert, whatever? So I wonder if you could comment on that. So you have to have multi-skills in all those different areas. That's the first point. The second point that Bob made about your PhD and those 5 years post-PhD, a PhD is an apprenticeship in academia. So you do your PhD, you go off and do this 5 years post-PhD, publishing from your PhD in that area. But the big challenge is after you've PhD, after you've wrung everything you could possibly get out of your PhD, the next project after that and the next project, it's like you have to go back and do a miniature PhD every time you do a paper. And that's a whole sort of skill set again. So do you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Elspeth. I'll have a go. You're right. We have a number of different skills that we have to use. In terms of the personality thing, I would say that everybody is a mixture of introvert and extrovert, but the key defining characteristic is where you're most comfortable. So lots of people will say, oh, you're very extroverted. You'll go up and, talk on panels and things. I'm not at all, is I'm not super comfortable sitting up here. I can do it. And hopefully it's fine, but I'm actually most comfortable sitting in the house doing the writing. So I can do the teaching because, that I just that it's my job, it's what I do. I can do it, but it's not where I'm most comfortable. So I can act. I can put on an extrovert performance, if you like, and other people can put on the introvert performance where you actually need to sit down and concentrate, but you're more happy when you're in front of a group of people, or you're more comfortable when you're in a big crowd. So it's not so much that you have to be one or the other, but more that you just have a space where you're more comfortable, I think. And that's probably the way I would answer that one.
Kirsten, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on a second part of Elspeth's point, which I think is really important. I completely agree with that transition to becoming a postdoctoral researcher. I think is a really hard transition to make. I found it really hard and did a series of very small little projects, which kind of kept me going. But I think at that stage, it's so important to have a good mentor to help you make that transition through. And, you know, I struggled to find that at the time. I mean, subsequent, but that would, you're absolutely right. That is a kind of watershed moment in terms of your career. And it usually happens at a time when you are full of trying to develop teaching materials and understanding your new institution. So I think a good mentor, many people will be very lucky that their PhD supervisor will take on that role. But for others, you know, finding someone, and I might actually take this opportunity to flag the CAUTHE mentoring program as one of the conduits to help people in that position.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Bob?
I'd like to add one final comment about empires rising and falling. I played cricket with the director of human resources at Charles Sturt University, and he gave me the best career advice I've ever received. And he said, look after your own best interests because the university won't. It will look after its own best interests. And so make sure if you have a career path, make sure that in spite of empires rising and falling, in spite of heavy teaching loads, in spite of everything else, that you do enough to make sure that your career can develop.
That's a good point. I want to go to the next question because there was someone, I forgot who had their hand up over here. Oh, okay, good. And there's one online. Thank you,
It
Penny.
is all right. Thank you. I have a question. When you were talking about the different generation of researchers, what, in your opinion, why do you think it is, I suppose, more common now to see early research career students who actually have very little to none industry experience at a greater scale? So talking about, you know, 5 to 10 year industry experience in managing supervisory roles and so forth. Why do you think that there has been such a shift? Because you were talking about the other two generations and that you actually did come from an industry and a lot of that experience. And so that's kind of my question is like, why has the dynamic changed? Why is the research now more seen as a, you know, core requirement, I suppose, or aspiration as you just graduate from your studies versus after you have actually done a lot of industry experience and then came back with a more mature outlook on the industry and the problems we might have?
Well, I'll just jump in and then someone else can jump in. I think one of the reasons, to be honest, is that when us oldies like Bob and I were graduating from our undergraduate degree, there were lots of jobs. So you could go and get work and you could work your way up, and then you'd sort of choose to go back to study thinking, oh, I'm a bit bored with this. I think I'll go back and do a master's or PhD or whatever. And I think there's a lot more people now that don't have those options. And so they go, oh, I'll just keep doing study because I don't really have any other options. Or they get a scholarship and so they just don't really look at those other options. But I think we probably had more to choose from in terms of jobs, probably.
I think that's probably true. I did 15 years in the tourism industry in Scotland before I became an academic, but I think I was slightly out of step with a lot of people of my sort of era, if you want to call it that. I think in part it's because of the increasing competition for jobs. So as, you know, let's say you graduate with your undergraduate at 21, 22, if you want to have a, you know, sort of feel that you've got your feet under the table by the time you're 30, if you want to be doing that as an academic, you have to go straight into PhD so that you can get the publications, so that you can then try to find the job, so that you can then be settled by, you know, whatever age you put on that. And I think that that's probably at least partly explains it, because people would feel that taking time out to work in industry wasn't going to get them that academic job that they want, even though I fully agree that it's really important to have an industry, have some experience somewhere of the industry, because it just helps you understand. So, you know, I don't want to call them real world problems because that's another university's tagline. It's not mine, but but you know, it gives you that idea of what people are grappling with. You're laughing up here.
Anybody else want to comment on that one before we move on?
It's also the nature of universities has changed. When I started, the system went from the old universities to all the new universities, and they were started as colleges of advanced education where there is a very strong industry and applied focus. Now universities demand everybody be research active. And when I started, most other disciplines demanded a doctorate, but because there was nobody in tourism with a doctorate, then that requirement was waived. And that actually hurt the development of the field as a legitimate university level subject. Now with so many doctoral graduates, then the university are saying, well, we need a doctorate more than industry experience if we're going to be recognized as a legitimate university, and if tourism, hospitality, and events is going to be recognized as a legitimate field of study. Did you want to add something, Kirsten?
Now you just mentioned that, I was going to just refer back to, you know, our accreditations as well. I mean, most of us work in business schools, I think, and if we're at a university, at a business school, we'll want to be AACSB accredited, and they set very strict parameters around what qualifications the staff have to have, and it's not industry focused. So
no, that's true. I'm going to go online. Richard, I don't know if anybody put their hand up that wants to ask their question on your end, or are you just reading chats, or both?
Yes, I'll just, we have some comments and questions in the chat. First, I think it's related to the teaching job of academics. Jenny Small commented that while teaching may be a critical part of the job, academics receive far more training in being a researcher than standing up in front of a class. And then Tracy also had a comment on the same topic. Performing in teaching may not align with your inherent personality, but it's a behavior choice that may more require time to refresh and recover from that for an extrovert.
Yeah.
And then a question from Tracy. I think this could be directed to Noel Scott. How much do you think gatekeepers, also known as journal and grant reviewers, up the creation of new ideas or theories?
Did you catch that? So he's asking about, who was asked that? Tracy was asking, how much do the gatekeepers or editors, in other words, or reviewers control what kinds of theories get applied? I think, is that right? Did I get that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so great question. So just come back before I answer that. Thank you for the opportunity to talk again, because I like talking. So we are drifting a little bit in terms of the topic. So we are talking here about researcher identity, although there has been discussions about, because it's on top of everyone's mind, about being an academic generally. So I think it's good to talk about research particularly, and we haven't really sort of discussed what that research identity is from a normative perspective even. In terms of your question, I think it's a very interesting question. I think that, first of all, where does theory come from in tourism? It's imported from other disciplines. It's not necessarily and arguably even effectively created within the field of tourism. The theories that we're using have and will continue to come from other areas. The second part of the question is what is the controlling the control that editors have? Well, they have the control to the extent that journals seem to be privileged in publication and rewards from universities. And certainly, I don't feel that any journals, although a journal of, one of the journals recently has suggested that it wants to try and develop new knowledge. But although that might be the stated aim of all journals, I don't feel that they actually have any agenda to do that. So I think instead journals are driven by other metrics such as number of publication, number of citations and names and things like that, rather than the effective creation of new ideas. So, and I don't see any real discrimination across top tier journals or low tier journals in terms of the quality of the ideas, in terms of new knowledge that are written in the papers. So journal editors have a controlling role, but they're not using that to control and create new knowledge in an effective way, in my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being a better chair than me. You're a good point. You made a good point that we probably need to get back on the topic. We're being a bit guided by the questions, of course, and the comments, but I will come back to research identity. I just want to see if Richard wanted to jump in one more time.
So far, there's none on the chat.
Okay. Is there another question? Oh, good on you, Effie. Have you got a microphone there?
Yes, thank you. I'm Effie Steropoulos from William Aglis Institute. So my question relates to identity and industry.
Good girl.
And maybe a question for Kirsten. You've been mentioning working closer with industry. How do you adapt the language when you say, I'm a qualitative researcher and, you know, I can help you from a normative perspective? Well, that doesn't mean anything to industry, right? They speak a different language. So how can you approach that topic in a way that it's convincing to them that they understand what you actually can do for them?
Well, I mean, there's two elements, which is sort of getting out and talking to industry and building those relationships. But there's also, you're right in terms of the language, but I think we're already doing that. I mean, we adapt our language for teaching for different levels, for different subjects. So, you know, we adapt it if we're writing. I know a number of people in the room have written for outlets like The Conversation, and it's a very different language that we'd use there. I mean, you're trying to use plain language. So I guess it's not so much the actual language as what they want to know is what is the point of your research? What are the outcomes that are coming from that? So focusing on that. So, I mean, you know, you would never sort of repeat to them what you've written in an academic paper, but you pull out, you know, what are the key, what does this mean? And then you talk about that. And, you know, there's a lot of workshops that all universities and institutions will run on, you know, talking to media, because it's similar talking to media. You know, if you do a media interview, they want like a sentence that they can pull out and present, and it's got to be quite clear. Now, they might be happy for it to be slightly more academic-y sounding because that's why they've interviewed you, you know, but it's, you know, about that language. But for me, I mean, I'm pretty introverted, so going into a room full of people from industry I don't know is quite hard. But I actually find that a lot of the conversations I will have with them are not necessarily about work at all. They'll be about other parts of work, you know, like my pets or my kids, and you know, where did you go on holiday and what's going on in the news? And that's how you kind of start to build those relationships between people rather than between you're an industry person, I'm an academic. And that probably relates a bit to identity, because it's about, you know, finding that mutual ground that you've got, and you know, identities that you can connect with each other. So, you know, if you're looking for how do I adapt my language, I would look for what training opportunities are there at the university. You know, there's usually media training and things where they can help you develop your pitch. And if that helps.
Can I just, I'll come to you in a second, Judith, but I just have to pick up on this whole applied research thing, because at some stage somebody put the label on me and said, and this must be part of my identity, well, you're an applied researcher. And I was sort of taken aback because I've never really thought about it. And then I thought, well, yeah, thank you. I actually like that, because it does mean, in contrast to Noel to some extent, it does mean that I don't come up with new theory very often. I'm often applying things. But I did want to say, and this came up earlier, that sometimes 10 years or 15 years after I publish something, somebody calls me and says they read something, and I'm thinking, man, I did write that, didn't I? So be patient, because you may be an applied researcher 20 years from now, and you may find that people are actually using your ideas in ways that you probably never intended. And it's actually probably the best part of my career, if I look back, is that people actually used it. That was really cool, you know. So
It's nice when that happens.
it's
isn't it?
fantastic.
No, I was just a very quick comment, Effie. I was just going to say it's not called research translation for no reason. And if you're not, if it's not your thing, then get a translator. Really, you know, I mean, we don't all have to be good at everything. So if you really are finding that, you know, explaining your ideas, your academic things is hard, then talk to someone who can help translate for you. You know, we don't all have to be good at everything.
We're just about out of time. I just looked at my watch. Let me think. Do we want to add any final comments, or is everybody happy with just where we got to? Oh, funny that Noel wants to say something. Go for it, Noel.
I think one of the most valuable points for me is this idea that there is no one research identity, okay? You have to find yours. The universities are trying to squeeze us into particular types and normative roles, but it doesn't have to be. And for journal authors and for us as researchers, perhaps, we might want to think the distinction between applied research and new research is, I think, very important. And it's not something that's well understood in tourism. People tend to think of research rather than types of research, whether it's applied or not. And I think if, in answer to the question about research editors and their role, if they were thinking more about that distinction and trying to find new research ideas, their roles might be quite different to the ones that they have at the moment.
Everybody happy up here? Everybody happy over there? All right, let's thank the panel for their very diverse and all the contributions. And thank you, Erica, for kicking things off. I'll turn it back to you, or what do you want to do?
Just before we finish the panel, I was just hoping Eric's behind the screen there, if he could show the full gallery view, because I think there's about 15 or 20 people online, just so you can see all the faces. Yeah, he's one. Hi, Richard. If we just go to gallery. Oh, there's 16 people online, including myself.
Yeah, some might not have their video on.
Just wave.
That's a good idea. Some will have the video on. There's 16, is there?
Yeah, there's more than that, but yeah, they've got their videos off. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks to the panel. So we have morning tea now, I believe. Is that right, Penny? Just here. I should know this, but
I did see people sneaking in.
oh, you did. Good. Okay, I wasn't paying attention.
It wasn't just people.
All right. And sorry, people online, we've got half an hour. We'll come back at 11:30 for if you're attending. Yeah, same Zoom. If you're attending the mid-year meeting, which is open to everybody, chapter directors, members. So hope you can stay online and join us. And sorry you miss out on the morning tea.
Oh, they've got morning tea.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica.